Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming to this Sunday service. Today we are having a fall Ohigan service in conjunction with a Shinriko, Kakushinriko memorial service. So you can see all the information of a Shinriko, Kakushinriko on this program. I believe all of you already read. So you know who they are, a Shinriko, Kakushinriko. Then we just sang a song, a Shinriko, Kakushinriko. Then now you know who they are. So today we are so fortunate to have our guest speaker this morning, Reverend Dr. Carmela Javellana-Hirano from Salt Lake Buddhist Temple. Then usually I introduce guest speaker's wife or family, but today I'd like to introduce our guest speaker's husband, Jerry Hirano Sensei. So I have a introduction of our guest speaker today, but she was working on today's Dharma message just 1 minute before the service starts. So maybe I'd like to give her much more time. So she received her Tokudo ordination with Irene Goto Sensei. They are same group. They went together. Then 2014, then I was one of the instructors for this group to teach ritual and sutra chanting. So that's why today's sutra chanting was so beautiful this morning. So now I'd like to welcome Carmela Sensei. Yoroshiku onegaishimasu. Thank you.
Please join me in Gassho. All women who firmly rely on Amida Tathagata and entrust themselves to Amida to save them in regard to the afterlife will unfailingly be delivered. For concerning women abandoned by all other Buddhas, Amida Tathagata himself made the supreme great vow, thinking, if I do not save women, which of the other Buddhas will save them? Respectfully, Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for indulging me. I was telling Kusunoku Sensei, I don't know if I can keep it to 15 minutes because I have a lot to say based on our conference yesterday, and then about Ohigan, and then about Ishini and Kakushini, and then I want to throw in Renyo in there as well. And so I want to try to condense it as much as possible, but I apologize in advance because I don't know if I could do that. So anyway, you can go to sleep if you'd like. I do want to thank Sensei for inviting me and the organizing committee. I had a lot of fun yesterday, and I was telling everyone that I wear a lot of hats, but my favorite is definitely Okusan. And I didn't know really what it meant until I asked Jerry, my husband, what's Okusan mean? And he says it's the woman behind. So if you notice in the Naijin lineup here today, all the men were in front and the women were behind. Which is fine. So then I asked him, well, what's the woman in front? And he said, obstacle. So I apologize being an obstacle, but I think that's my intent and purpose today, is to put a little squirm in each one of you, just to kind of get you thinking about what women are all about. And I'm so glad that men are here, because we need men who are sensitive to the sensibilities of women and vice versa. So I like seeing this co-ed group, which is essentially what Renyo's message is, as I'm going to talk about some more. So the quote above was taken from Gobunsho. or Ofumi, which is a collection of Renyo's letters. Actually, in the Gabunsho, there's 80 letters, but he wrote a total of 265 letters in total. But what is special about the Gabunsho is that 15 of those letters are specifically about women, about the salvation of women, about the place of women in the big community of Buddhists and non-Buddhists, but also in our sect of Jodo Shinshu. Women do have I would not say special, but equal privilege to men in our sect. And that's why Irene and I and Rosalie were able to go take Tokudo in Japan, because they don't really care about gender. They care about, whether you study hard and do what you're supposed to do and chant really good. So I want to talk first about Renyo, and then I want to take you to Ashini and Kokushini, and then come to the 21st century, and what this all means for all of us. I don't know if you recognize what Renyo really is in place of our history, but here's that guy over there. He is the 8th Gomonshu of Hongan-jiha. So you know that Shinan was the founder of our sect, his wife's Ashini. But Renyo is the great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson of Kakushini. All right, but what he is really known for is that he popularized Jodo Shinshu in Japan. And how he did this was outreach. He went to every town he could think of and basically held a Buddhist conference, just like what we did yesterday. Okay, so he brought the teachings to the townspeople. And he did this by foot. He also gave written scrolls so that they could study the teachings, one of which we now know is the 10-character Nembutsu called Kinyo Jinjipo Mugeko Nyorai, which for Dharma geeks, you could look that up later. Okay, but really what appeals to me about Renyo is how he had a special place for women in his heart and in his writings. The question then becomes, how did that happen? Well, it comes from his trauma, his broken heart. We talked about wounded hearts yesterday and what it means to have this gift, really, to have our hearts broken. So Renyo had his heart broken many, many times. When he was 6, he lost his mother. She was banished from Honganji because she was this woman's servant's bastard son. When his father, in his zenyo, in his youthful indiscretions, basically, had him, they got pregnant. So she had to leave because her stature was lower than the hierarchy at the time. And then Renyo acquired a stepmother who did not treat him very well, and she preferred her own son to take over Honganji someday. But what really happened was that Renyo had 5 wives. Did you know that? He's not a polygamist. He's a serial monogamist. He had one wife after another, 4 of which he outlived because he lived to be really old, like 85. Okay? And every time a wife died, you know how it is when a spouse dies. I mean, how do you even come back from that? But he was able to, I think, bear the suffering and the pain of loss and grief because of his firm faith and trusting in the Nembutsu. Then on top of that, he had 27 kids out of this 5 marriages. 14 of them were girls. 6 of them died when they were very young or in their early adulthood. So you can imagine what that felt, to lose your child, not only your wives, but your children. What could he do? His heart was broken over and over and over again. But because of that trauma, he was much more aware and cognizant of the role of women in his life. So we need to put Renyo's writing in the backdrop of the Mahayana literature, okay, which talks a lot about the denigration of women, much like what we see, in our current social media and the news. There's a lot of talk about trauma and sexual abuse and malignment and discrimination against women. I think we need to remember that everybody in some way has been discriminated against, and it's not a woman thing, it's a human being thing. The human mind is inherently biased and discriminating, and that's why our hearts get broken, because we don't always get what we want. But anyway, the background of Renyo's letters, especially about women, came from the Mahayana literature that basically put women down. It basically talks about the 5 hindrances of women and the 3 subordinations, okay? So at the time, early, 100 AD, all of that, then on, Mahayana talks about how women cannot become Brahma gods, or Indra, or Chakravartin kings, demon kings, or Buddhas, meaning that women cannot become enlightened because they are evil. They also have 3 subordinations. They have to be beneath 3 people in their lives, their fathers, their husbands, and their sons. So Renyo, I think, took offense on that, and he wrote this treatise, right? And you could also look up the work of the scholars in Jodo Shinsho about how Renyo was defiantly and actively arguing against this form of thinking in Mahayana, which makes Jodo Shinsho an exception, I think, in the various sanghas of Buddhists then and now. I thought about the Buddha himself too, because it all comes back to him, right? And where did this 5 hindrances and 3 subordinations come from? So the Buddha himself, remember, talked about the larger sutra, and the Buddha talked about Amida's 48 vows, and the 35th vow specifically is about the salvation of women. Now, you could read that later because it's kind of geeky, and we could talk maybe about it during our informal discussions, okay? But what happened then was that the first nun, actually, that the Buddha admitted to his Sangha was Mahaprajapati, his foster mother, his adoptive mother, right? But at the time, he had to establish a set of rules for the monks and the nuns because, co-ed was really a no-no at the time when you had this code of celibacy, right? So he put 250 rules for the guys and 348 rules for the ladies. So I was thinking to myself, why do the ladies have more rules than the guys? Are they naughtier than the guys? What's going on here? But this was really because he wanted to protect the women in the Sangha because he knew about men's, predispositions, and he wanted to ensure that they maintained this code of conduct in the Sangha. Even the Buddha had to walk away from his own wife and child, right? So he can fulfill his purpose. But that meant breaking his heart as well and leaving the family that he knew and the traditions that he knew and embark on this totally unknown journey into his own enlightenment. After the Buddha's death, in the Mahayana literature, this blossom, this malignment for women continued for quite some time. They were described as uncontrollable, envious, greedy, and weak in wisdom. So, I'm a psychiatrist, and I always kind of interpret these things in a psychopathological manner. So from a psychiatrist's perspective, when someone puts another person down in that way, they are coming from this unfinished parts of themselves that are so painful that they project it onto others because they cannot carry that pain for themselves. So in psychobabble, that word is called projection. We project basically our evil mind, if you will, like onto a projector. Like yesterday we had a screen, right? Those parts of our minds that we haven't dealt with. So it, to me, is fodder. It's really food for thought to think about what is that about me that is so hateful, that is so resentful and bitter. This is self-reflection, which ultimately is the work that each of us must do in order to understand what it means to be non-discriminating and to be accepting and to be kind, which is what we're all trying to do, yeah? Okay. So Renyo had to say something about this outrage, about the way that women were thought of in his time. He actually had quite a following of women students wherever he went. So for Renyo, there was no gender discrimination, no age, no ethnic, no socioeconomic discrimination. It was equal opportunity for everybody to the other shore, to Ohigan, from Saha, the world of fear, to Sukhavati, the land of bliss. So we need to have not just the women in this hondo, but also the men to realize that when we are all in this journey, on this Ohigan journey to the other shore, this is not about gender. This is about our humanity itself. I was thinking, for the women here who haven't yet joined the BWA, I'm going to put a plug. You can join the BWA, the Buddhist Women's Amida Activists for Equal Enlightenment of Women. Okay, so talk about gender bias, right? When I first came to Jodo Shinshu, I came from the Zen tradition, and before that, this nothing. And then before that, Catholicism, which of course has its own gender biases, right? But when I first heard about Amida, I thought, oh, is Amida a woman? Because if Amida was a man, it would be Amido, right? I mean, talk about gender stereotypes. That's sort of the Spanish background of being colonized in the Philippines for 300 years. Of course, that was my ignorance, which is great, when you're starting out on the spiritual path. It's always good to not know anything. Otherwise, if you know everything, it's like, what's the point of learning? Okay. So come back 150 years before Renyo to the time of Eshini and Kakushini, right? So as you know, Eshini was Shinran's wife, and Kakushini, the youngest daughter, who took care of Shinran up until his death. And Eshini and Shinran were separated, so they never saw each other after that. And one of the most profound messages that I received from Eshini reading her letters, right, was this letter to her daughter about Shinran and about their relationship. Okay. In one letter, Eshini wrote about a dream that she had two images of the Buddha, one of pure light and the other one was a face. And then in the dream, she was told that the light was actually the light of Honen, as Seishi, right? The Bodhisattva of wisdom. And the other one had Shinran's face as the Bodhisattva of compassion. So she wrote to Kakushini and she said, I did not say anything about my husband being Kanon, but in my own mind, I never looked upon him from the time forward in an ordinary way. So she kind of saw him in a totally different light, from that dream. You, Kakushini, should ponder these things as well. Thus, you should have no doubt concerning Shinran's birth in the Pure Land, however his death may have been. With regard to the same manner, I have heard that our son, Masukata, was also present at his death. It is great joy for me to know how strong the bond is between parent and child. And we talked about intergenerational trauma yesterday, and how this bond is absolutely necessary to get through the traumas that go from one generation to the next. Okay. This is letter 3 written in 1262. So here Eshini sees her husband as the Bodhisattva of compassion. And ladies, believe me, it can be very helpful when you want to put your own husbands in the doghouse. Eshini also wrote to Kakushini her grief. Okay. I constantly feel the desire to hear from you while I am still living. But you are so far away that you seem beyond the clouds. Truly, I feel as though the bond between parent and child was somehow absent. Particularly since you are my youngest child, I have always thought of you as dearest. But it will not be possible for me to see you. So it would truly be heartbreaking for me never even to hear from you. This is letter 8, 1264. Again, this is talking about Ashini's heartbreak about not seeing her daughter as well. So this broken heart that we were talking about yesterday becomes the seed of our awakening. For me, it took the heartbreak of Ashini and Kakushini to recognize the comfort and security of the Nembutsu. It took many heartbreaks for Renyo to speak out in defense of women and come back to the 35th vow and explained it in a different way as non-discriminatory. Do you want to know what the 35th vow is? Any Dharma geeks here? Okay, just in brief. The 35th vow basically says that when Bodhisattva Dharmakara wanted to become Amida Buddha, he fulfilled 48 vows. And the 35th vow basically said that I am not going to be enlightened unless women are born in the Pure Land as men. Meaning they have to undergo a gender change, a gender reassignment. But that's not really what it means. You have to put it in the context of discrimination against women in his time. And what that really means is that for women to be born in the Pure Land, they are born as male because then they do not carry the baggage of the human discriminatory mind against women in that realm. So they're equal to the men because, you know, the men were like the top dogs at the time. It's not that way now, is it? Unless you watch CNN. Anyway, that's my guilty pleasure, CNN. Okay. So one of the main topics that we talked about yesterday was how do we embrace our own broken hearts? Because that is extremely difficult. How do we do that without passing it on to somebody else, projecting on this thing that we carry, this anger and this rage, without dumping it on someone and causing more suffering for everybody? We talked about how to mend these broken pieces of ourselves with gold, this pottery style in Japan called kintsugi. Have you heard of kintsugi? You could look it up on Amazon. They come in kits. And it's different pottery fragments that are pieced together with precious metal, usually gold. And the end product is all the scars, right, of this brokenness that emerge into something even more beautiful, more touching, okay, more profound. I think about the people in my life that I have wounded. We did Nikon reflection yesterday. It's looking at the self fearlessly, if you will, and really just coming to grips and being completely honest, ruthlessly honest. I think about my family. I think about my mother. It's a very similar conversation that I had with my mother that Ashini had in her letter to Kakushini. Will I ever see you again? I might die. You might die before we see each other again. I think about my daughter who I put through hell and back. My sisters, my family, my friends, not just women, but everybody across the board. And how I inflicted those wounds on them and how I myself have been wounded. When I left Catholic Church and disappointed my family, I went to the other side of the globe to practice medicine, to fulfill my purpose there, overwhelmed with self-doubt and being an ethnic minority and having to prove myself above and beyond the current standards at the time. So I had to work harder than everybody else. I was victimized by the choices that I made. You know, that's my delusion, of course. The traumas of my first marriage, the deaths of my family. And to me, I come back to Renyo's message about Amida's non-discriminating compassion. And I am comforted by that encountering the Nembutsu and feeling ultimately completely at home in the Jodo Shinshu temple, I feel like my healing has already begun a long time ago. So I wanted to mention, if Ashini's Bodhisattva came to her in a dream, mine came to me from Yahoo Personals. There's my confession. And I had my dream husband, who I'm always grateful for showing me what Jodo Shinshu is, because when I met him, I was like, what's Jodo Shinshu? You know, I know Zen, I know Tibetan a little bit, but what's Jodo Shinshu? Then I noticed they've been there for over 100 years, and I'm going, what What's wrong with this? How come I have never encountered this teaching? It's like, what a travesty. I feel like I have been cheated, you know? Is it because we've been so silent? Is it because we've been scared to speak up? Is it because we are always apologetic for being Buddhist? I mean, what is that all about? I just want to raise these questions so you have something to chew on, you know, for quite a while. And of course, here now we see this continuation of this suffering, this transgenerational suffering, which might explain our silence, maybe. The Issei immigration, right? Leaving behind what they know and coming to what they cannot know until they're there. So talk about anxiety, right? And then the blatant condemnation and persecution of Japanese Americans during World War II, where they lost everything they worked for. And yet they maintain this loyalty to the United States. I mean, talk about resiliency, huh? And now we look at what we live in. Huh? It continues, right? Discrimination, hate crimes, gun violence, you name it. But what is this all about, really? It's our suffering that brings us together. It's our suffering that ultimately goes beyond discrimination. We're all human beings, and we're vulnerable, and we're hurt. But there is nothing wrong with that. It does take courage, right, to accept that, embrace that. So if entrusting in Amida ensures women's true settlement in the Pure Land, what's there to worry about? This anxiety that we feel in the swirl of Saha, so we want to go to the other shore, Ohigan. It's just what comes with the territory of being human. It doesn't mean that fear itself needs to be feared. Was that Churchill? The only thing to fear is fear itself. Yeah? Okay. So I think about the BWA, especially, because the BWA has always been historically the glue that keeps BCA together. But there are many unsung heroes or heroines, right, in BWA, because talk about multitasking, yeah? You have homes and children and husbands and careers and kitchens and teriyaki chickens and, and barbecues and dishes to wash. I mean, we need the guys to step up here. We have to ask ourselves, if we, like Renyo, how can we not say something about this? Or like Ashini, how can we not write anything about this? Or Kakushini, how can we not do anything about this? Which is sharing the Dharma. The Dharma of equality, it's not sameness, okay? We are complementary to each other. The yin and the yang, right? The joining of Bumbu and Buddha. This is not about sameness. This is about complementarity. In that way, equality. We all have a place. For me, I would rather be Oksan than be here, because this is really totally nerve-wracking. I have to. And so I would like to point out that there is no such thing as a woman card or a man card. Certainly not in our organization, certainly not in BCA. There was an article written recently about how men seem to be more visible in the upper management levels of our organization. Why is that? Can we judge it just by looking at it at surface value? Is that because women are denigrated in our Sangha? I don't think so. I think it's because the women are so busy. They don't have time to chit-chat in all these boring meetings. You know, they would rather get things done. But then we'd have to ask ourselves, how do we lead in the 21st century, especially as women? There was a women in leadership agency that was recently created in Salt Lake City, and it's called Women in Leadership. And the speaker was talking about women in leadership, and I'm going, well, that puts us at a disadvantage right there, right? Saying that women in leadership, what does that mean? Why can't we just say leadership without talking about men versus women? For me, leadership is leadership, you know. I mean, we just look like this, but in the Pure Land, who cares? We're all there. So I invite you to study the Dharma together. And I think that studying the Dharma can definitely give us a real taste of what our teachings are all about, what the Nembutsu is all about. I mean, we say Namo Amida Butsu, but what does that really mean for each of us personally? So I invite you to study the Dharma together. Let's talk about it together. Let's definitely eat together. Let's moku 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 together. Because moku 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 brings out, right? Whatever it is that's eating up inside of us, and goodness knows misery loves company. Who else but, you know, our Sangha. We need to create a safe Sangha where it's okay to talk and hash things out. That's the first ingredient of a successful organization, is this feeling of safety, of being home. That we are all accepted for who we are, even though we're all different from each other. Let us remember that it's in our wounded hearts that the Nembutsu lives. And the Nembutsu lives in our wounded hearts. So please join me in Gassho. All women who firmly rely on Amida Tathagata and entrust themselves to Amida to save them in regard to the afterlife will unfailingly be delivered. For concerning women abandoned by all other Buddhas, Amida Tathagata himself made the supreme great vow, thinking, if I do not save women, which of the other Buddhas will save them? Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Thank you, thank you. Thank you so much.